From The Australian, here's what's on the front. I'm Claire Harvey. It's Tuesday, September 23, 2025. Legal tobacco sales have collapsed by $2 billion and the government's legacy is in ashes. That's according to convenience stores and tobacco companies who say the government's reforms are ludicrous and have handed the cigarette market to criminals. Charlie Kirk will be posthumously honoured with the Presidential Medal of Freedom, and his wife Erica will become chief executive of his Turning Point Conservative movement, with a goal of saving the young men she calls the Lost Boys of the West. Erica Kirk offered forgiveness to her husband's alleged killer in a powerfully emotional memorial. We've got a full episode about that. Jump back in your feed to hear Erica Kirk, JD Vance and Donald Trump talking of mercy and vengeance. Palestinians want a homeland just as Jews do. That's the message from a major speech delivered by Anthony Albanese to the United Nations overnight, as Australia formally recognises Palestinian statehood. Meanwhile, Hamas is brutally executing so-called collaborators, and Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu is vowing Palestine will never be a state. Today, the political tactics behind Albanese's trip to New York and how Donald Trump will react. Geoff Chambers is The Australian's political editor, and he's in New York with the Prime Minister for what's turning out to be an absolutely whirlwind week.
A bit warmer than Canberra.
It's beautiful.
Geoff, it started with the Prime Minister and Penny Wong standing in the Rose Garden of the United Nations, announcing that Australia has now formally recognised Palestine.
We recognise the legitimate and long-held aspirations of the people of Palestine of a state of their own. And in doing so, we reaffirm Australia's long-standing position of two states, the state of Israel and the state of Palestine, living side by side behind internationally recognised borders in peace and security.
What does that actually mean?
I think for Australia to go out on a limb like this, they really needed Britain and Canada, two other members of the Five Eyes Security Alliance, and all very close friends and allies traditionally with the United States. And I think it was because of that cover, and all three countries and leaders in Keir Starmer, Mark Carney and Anthony Albanese, they coordinated at the same time to come out together.
In the face of the growing horror in the Middle East, we are acting to keep alive the possibility of peace and a two-state solution. That means a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable Palestinian state. At the moment, we have neither.
And they came out probably a day before people expected them, because Emmanuel Macron, France, with Saudi Arabia, has over this year been holding a forum called the Two-State Solution Conference, which is obviously aligned with the UN. And this was seen as a platform by like-minded Western nations to come together for this moment, which is the United Nations General Assembly and Anthony Albanese's first high-level leaders week, to make this very strong position, and they've done that at the front of the United Nations. So it is a big moment in terms of Australian foreign policy. This is a decades-long position that's been held in relation to Israel and Palestine, and obviously there's some really big question marks over, is this just simply a symbolic move?
It's the culmination of a political dream for Anthony Albanese long before Palestine became a really popular cause with people marching over the Sydney Harbour Bridge about it. But the reality on the ground in Palestine is something different from what I think Anthony Albanese might have envisaged in a Palestinian state overnight. Hamas, Islamic Jihad and the Mujahideen brigades, all three of them are terrorist prescribed organisations, executed two Palestinian men they're accusing of collaborating with Israel. It was absolutely nauseating, Geoff. They blindfolded them and then shot them dead. And that was something that Hamas and the other organisations considered as good news. They were publicising this on their own social media channels. How does that reality square with the vision that Anthony Albanese has?
It's a harsh and stark reality. It's like the Wild West, and law is not abided by. Hamas rules with an iron fist. These other groups rule with an iron fist. And this stock that all these countries, including Australia, has put in the Palestinian Authority is really misleading, because anyone that has been following what's been going on the ground in the West Bank and in Gaza over the past decade and beyond have seen the rise of Hamas and the capitulation of Arafat's Palestinian Authority, which obviously transferred to Mahmoud Abbas, who is turning 90 in November. And once he departs from that role, there will be a huge power vacuum in what is already a very fragile Palestinian Authority. So it is quite unbelievable that people are taking the PA at their word that they can disarm Hamas, that they can hold free democratic elections. I mean, there have not been elections there for how many years? Abbas's job has not come up for how many years? And what is the most powerful organisation and movement there? It is Hamas. So I asked the question of the Prime Minister when he did a press conference, and I said, well, if a Hamas affiliate or Hamas by another name wins free elections, or if the Palestinian Authority cannot deliver on any of these big reforms that they're suggesting that they can deliver on, are there any triggers at all in this declaration of Palestinian statehood? And I think it's pretty clear that now that this Labor government has made this decision, they don't intend to turn back on this. And this is where it becomes hugely symbolic, because where do you put your embassy? What level of support? Who are you supporting? If a Hamas affiliate wins, do you stick with them? Do you engage with them? There's a lot of questions that aren't being answered, and the only answer you get is, well, this is really early stages. This is making a really strong point, and we'll see where things go from here.
Anthony Albanese likes to say that he's been underestimated his whole life, and he's certainly a master political tactician. He's not stupid. He must know that all of that is very unlikely, that any real Palestinian state will come into being under the conditions that he says that he's set. But in a speech that he made overnight, he's condemning Israel, condemning threats to annex parts of Palestine, condemning Israeli settlements in the West Bank, and condemning Israeli settlers for committing acts of violence, which the Israeli authorities say are illegal against Palestinians. So is the point of this then, given that Albanese is presumably a realist, just to put pressure on Netanyahu to end the war sooner?
I think not just from Australia's perspective, but we've obviously joined a bit of a coalition with Canada, Britain, France and others. I think that is absolutely the tactic here, and there will be elections coming up in Israel, but who's to say what the outcome of that is? And obviously democracies respect democratic elections, but I think ultimately putting aside the sort of personal strong feeling of the Prime Minister in terms of this issue politically, I think that he's been under pressure as well from Labor MPs and supporters that he makes this move. So to your point, yes, a very shrewd politician, something he believes in. And I think, realistically, it's probably not something that will come to fruition anytime soon.
Coming up, could the PM finally get in a room with Donald Trump? It's all happening under the auspices of the UN, but of course the UN is based in New York City on American soil in Donald Trump's hometown. The Prime Minister is going to cross paths with Donald Trump, and then he still hasn't had a meeting with the re-elected Trump. So that's something that he wants to deliver to shore up the AUKUS partnership and to ensure that Australia doesn't get worse punishment on tariffs. Given that that inflection point is where we're at now, is this all more unwise than it would have otherwise been?
I think this was a tactical move. It had been signposted over a period of time. It doesn't help, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. And I think that for a bunch of reasons, some more legitimate than others, I think it hasn't come together, and probably a bit of blame on both sides in terms of, timings and that commitment to it. Some do argue that Trump has had so many other things on his plate and that it isn't necessarily a bad thing that Australia isn't at the forefront of his mind. The Prime Minister, after talking about his decision to recognise Palestine, went out of his way at the press conference to invoke Charlie Kirk's memorial and express his condolences and sympathies to all those who loved Charlie Kirk, and that obviously includes Donald Trump. But we are a very close ally. The Quad's in trouble, AUKUS is under review. The tariffs, well, we've probably got away with it better than others, but you need a leader to lead a conversation. And, they might have had 4 phone calls now, but it is very much the time that they need to meet. I think that the Prime Minister and the people around him are a bit sort of traumatised by what happened when we all went to Canada for the G7 summit, and unfortunate sort of series of circumstances. But in that case, the Prime Minister he leant in very hard, talked about the meeting a lot, and then on the eve of the meeting, without any notice, it got cancelled. And this is the nature of Trump and his administration. It is chaotic. The scheduling is never set. So I think they've sort of worked that out that, okay, let's not actually vocalise things or push things out there. So I suspect when it happens, it'll be very late notice. And if it doesn't happen properly here in terms of a bilateral meeting, they will again cross paths late next month. Well, they're supposed to, in Malaysia for the ASEAN summit, and then in South Korea for the APEC summit.
Albanese didn't have to go to New York for the UN General Assembly. He, in fact, hadn't been to one since becoming Prime Minister in 2022. So presumably he's put a lot of thought into the decision to go at all. Is there a risk that it just blows up in his face if he doesn't get a meeting with Trump, or if he does get one that becomes a disaster?
Yeah, I think he's really trying to project himself after that election win as a stronger voice for a middle power. He's talking a lot about middle powers and that they should have a say at the table and shouldn't just be the big superpowers there, and that the middle powers can bring a lot to the conversation. He's also here to really tout for investment. That's a big push. He's trying to get bigger investment into Australia's clean energy and future made in Australia plans. But look, I think if he got a picture opportunity, I think in terms of punterland, in terms of voters who don't really like Trump back at home, they probably look at it and go, oh, they met. That's great. Obviously, those who follow security and politics a bit closer realise, well, it's not a substantive meeting. They need to form a relationship, and there needs to be certainty around AUKUS, Quad and other things. But in Prime Minister's defence, everything I hear is that Trump administration is purely chaotic and it's really hard to absolutely nail things down. But in saying that, we then hear that the Turkish president, who Albanese wants to talk to about COP31, the UN climate change summit, he's landed a White House meeting right after the UN week. So he'll head from New York down to Washington, and Trump will also meet Xi over at APEC next month.
Geoff Chambers is the Australian's political editor. He's on the road with Anthony Albanese in the US and UK this week. You can read all Geoff's reporting and all our analysis right now at theaustralian.com.au.